She sat at the corner table, hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her curls and smoothed the fabric of her dress. It wasn't just a blind date. For her, this was another chance to be seen not judged, not mocked, not measured against cruel stereotypes, but seen as a woman with worth. Yet the whispers started the moment she walked in. The laughter wasn't even subtle. A group of strangers at the bar smirked, nudged each other, and muttered words like desperate and out of place. She heard it, she always heard it, and every time it stung. This was supposed to be an evening of hope, but the sting of racism and prejudice followed her everywhere. Then he walked in, a man whose very presence shifted the air. Tall, sharp, sweeted, but with warmth in his eyes. The kind of warmth she hadn't seen in a long time. They didn't know it yet, but what was about to unfold would silence the room, shatter assumptions, and rewrite both of their lives in ways no one expected. Her name was Aaliyah, and at 32, she carried the kind of quiet strength that only comes from years of being both tender and tough at the same time. By day, she was a nurse, the one who held patients' hands when no one else would, the one who whispered hope into the ears of people fighting for their lives. She knew how to give, how to serve, how to pour every ounce of love she had into others. But when it came to her own heart, it often felt like no one wanted to hold it. Love had always been complicated for her, tangled up in other people's assumptions about who she was and what she deserved. She'd been told too many times, directly and indirectly, that she was too much or not enough all at once, too dark, too bold, too independent, too ambitious. And sometimes she was told nothing at all, just left waiting for texts that never came, staring at empty doorways where someone promised to be. Aaliyah had reached the point where rejection was no longer surprising, it was expected, and that was the cruelest part. It wasn't just the sting of one person turning away. It was the pattern, the heavy realization that for many, her skin tone had already made the decision before her smile or her spirit even had a chance. She remembered a night in college when a friend confessed that some guys in their circle liked her, but wouldn't date her openly. "They think you're gorgeous," her friend had whispered, "but you know they don't want to deal with the whole thing." The whole thing. As if her entire existence was some burden they couldn't bear in public. That sentence carved itself into her chest, and over the years, she had to patch that wound again and again. Still, hope was stubborn inside her. She wanted love, not the shallow kind that paraded on social media, but the kind that sat with her in silence and understood the weight she carried. She wanted someone who didn't just tolerate her blackness, but cherished it, honored it, and saw it as part of the beauty she carried. So when a friend suggested she try a blind date, she hesitated. Her first instinct was to laugh it off. Another setup, another night where she would dress her best and brace herself for disappointment. But something in her chest whispered back, what if? What if not everyone was like the ones before? What if there was someone out there willing to see beyond everything others used as excuses to look away? That's how she found herself in front of the mirror on a Friday night, smoothing down her dress, adjusting the curls she had learned to love only after years of hating them, whispering little prayers under her breath that this night would be different. When Aaliyah stepped into the restaurant, her heart was beating so loudly she swore the walls could hear it. She had chosen a deep burgundy dress, one that hugged her just enough to remind herself she was still beautiful, still worthy of being admired. But almost instantly, the energy in the room shifted. A few faces turned toward her, eyes scanning her from head to toe, not with curiosity but with judgment, the kind that slices into you without a single word spoken. She forced her steps to remain steady, her chin slightly lifted, though every inch of her body begged her to shrink, to disappear into the floor tiles. The hostess led her to a table near the center, and that only made it worse. As she sat, clutching her purse on her lap, she caught the sound of laughter bubbling from the bar. It wasn't friendly laughter. It had a sharp edge, the kind that was meant to cut. A man leaned toward his friend and whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "That can't be his date." Another voice followed, female this time, dripping with mockery. "He'll walk right out when he sees her." They didn't bother lowering their voices after that. They weren't even trying to hide it. To them, she wasn't a woman sitting nervously at a table. She was a spectacle, something to ridicule over cheap drinks. Her hands shook as she unfolded the napkin and placed it on her lap. She tried to focus on the candle flickering in the center of the table, but the sting of every glance burned hotter than the flame. She had lived through this before. The quick judgments, the way people decided she didn't belong in certain spaces. Restaurants where she was mistaken for staff, boutiques where security followed her, offices where she was overlooked while others with half her skill were praised. And now here it was again, condensed into one room where strangers she had never met laughed as though her worth could be summed up by her skin. Her throat tightened. She wanted to cry, but she wouldn't give them that satisfaction. She straightened her back, forced her face to remain calm, and told herself she was stronger than this moment. Still, she could feel the eyes on her, the weight of them pressing down, and it was suffocating. Every second stretched painfully, each tick of the clock reminding her she was sitting alone, waiting, while the room seemed to root for her humiliation. Marcus stepped into the restaurant with the kind of presence that turned heads without him trying. At 38, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built his life from the ground up. A sharp navy suit framed his tall frame, but it wasn't the fabric that gave him weight. It was the story behind it. Years of late nights, countless rejections from investors, the sting of almost losing everything, and the relentless determination that had finally turned his small startup into a multi-million-dollar tech company. To outsiders, Marcus was the definition of success, a CEO, a man who had it all. But the truth was success had come at a price. His wife, unable to bear the endless grind and the shadows of responsibility, had walked away years ago, leaving him alone to raise their son. Behind every boardroom victory, there was a loneliness he carried quietly, a longing for someone who could see past the headlines and into the man who just wanted to be loved. He scanned the restaurant as he entered, used to people staring, though tonight he wasn't looking for admiration. He was looking for her. And then he saw her, sitting at the table, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes darting nervously toward the floor. She looked like someone trying to hold herself together, while the world tried to break her apart. His chest tightened. He didn't know her yet, but he recognized the posture, the silent armor of someone who had been hurt one too many times. As he walked closer, he caught fragments of whispers, the mocking laughter that filled the air. He saw how her hands trembled as she tried to keep her composure, and something inside him stirred, a protective instinct, a fierce anger at the cruelty that hung over the room. But beyond the noise, what struck him most was her presence. She wasn't invisible to him, far from it. The way the candlelight reflected against her deep brown skin, the way her curls framed her face, the quiet strength in her eyes that refused to crumble even under ridicule, it all drew him in. To Marcus, she wasn't what the room tried to paint her as. She wasn't a punchline, she wasn't a misfit. She was radiant. She was the kind of woman he had been hoping to meet, but never thought he would find in a world that too often only showed him masks and pretense. And as he walked toward her table, he already knew this wasn't going to be just another date. It was something else entirely. Marcus didn't hesitate when he reached her. He leaned down, close enough for her to smell the faint trace of his cologne, and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. It wasn't rushed or awkward. It was deliberate, tender, the kind of gesture that spoke volumes before a single word was exchanged. Aaliyah froze, her breath catching in her chest. She hadn't expected that, not here, not in front of the stares that had been drilling holes into her since the moment she arrived. The restaurant hushed, as though the very walls leaned closer to witness what was unfolding. The people who had mocked her minutes ago suddenly had nothing to say. Their laughter dissolved into silence, their smirks wiped clean by disbelief. Marcus pulled out the chair across from her and sat down as though nothing unusual had happened. His smile was warm, steady, grounding. "I'm glad you came," he said simply, his voice low but filled with sincerity. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, though the sting of earlier whispers still lingered like smoke in the air. She searched his eyes, looking for even the faintest trace of pity, but there was none. What she found instead was focus. He was looking at her like she was the only person in the room. Their conversation began cautiously, as most blind dates do. Small talk about work, about the weather, about favorite foods. But it didn't take long before the surface cracked and deeper truth spilled out. Marcus spoke of his son, of the challenges of fatherhood, of the loneliness that even success couldn't erase. Aaliyah listened, her nurse's compassion softening the edges of his words. And then she shared her own story, the struggles of being dismissed, the pain of always feeling like she had to prove her worth twice as hard, the quiet exhaustion of carrying herself with strength when the world gave her no choice. The more they spoke, the more the energy around them shifted. What began as awkward glances and judgment from strangers turned into something unspoken but undeniable. People watched, but not with ridicule anymore. It was fascination, perhaps even shame, as they witnessed the connection sparking between two people who were refusing to play the roles society had written for them. For Aliyah, Every word Marcus spoke stitched together parts of her spirit she thought were beyond repair. For Marcus, every glance she gave him reminded him of what it meant to be seen not as a title, not as a provider, but as a man. Weeks melted into months, and what began as one evening of unexpected connection grew into something neither of them had anticipated. Marcus and Aaliyah found themselves carving out pieces of time in their crowded schedules just to be together. Coffee breaks turned into late-night phone calls, dinners into weekend trips with Marcus's son tagging along. For Aaliyah, meeting the boy was both a joy and a test. Children carried instincts sharper than most adults, and at first his eyes studied her with caution, as if trying to decide whether she would be another fleeting presence in his father's life. But Aaliyah met him with patience. She knelt to his level, listened to his stories about superheroes and science projects, learned how he liked his sandwiches cut, and laughed at his silly jokes without a hint of pretense. Slowly, the walls came down. One evening, after she tucked a blanket around him on the couch while he drifted off during a movie, Marcus looked at her with an expression that said more than words ever could. In that moment, he knew the relationship deepened not through grand gestures, but through the small, steady rhythm of care and consistency. Aaliyah's nurturing spirit blended into Marcus's structured world like a missing piece sliding into place. She reminded him to slow down, to breathe, to savor quiet moments instead of constantly chasing the next milestone. He gave her the security of knowing she was chosen openly and without hesitation, never hidden, never diminished. They balanced each other in ways neither of them had thought possible. Months later, Marcus suggested they go back to the very restaurant where it all began. Aaliyah hesitated, memories of the whispers and mocking stares rushing back, but he insisted. "Trust me," he said with a smile, and she did. When they walked in, the air seemed thick with recognition. Some of the same faces lingered at the bar, their eyes widening in disbelief as they saw the pair together, not broken by ridicule but stronger than before. The meal went smoothly, filled with laughter and easy conversation, until Marcus suddenly pushed back his chair and stood. For a heartbeat, Aaliyah thought he was leaving, but then he turned to her, his hand slipping into his pocket. Gas rippled through the room as he lowered himself onto one knee. The candlelight caught the silver of the ring, his voice steady as every eye in the restaurant fixed on them. Racism, prejudice, and cruelty tried to write her story. They tried to reduce Aaliyah to whispers, to laughter, to invisibility. But Marcus reminded her in the world that love sees beyond color, beyond bias, beyond the scars left by discrimination. His proposal wasn't just about marriage. It was defiance. It was proof that dignity and worth cannot be erased by mockery. How many Aliyahs sit at tables today, shrinking under the weight of cruel assumptions? How many are overlooked, dismissed, or silenced before anyone takes the time to see them? This story is more than romance. It's a call to open our eyes, to stop letting prejudice blind us. Because when love is real, it doesn't just transform two people, it changes the entire room. The laughter that once mocked her now served as the soundtrack to her victory. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we all learn to see what truly matters, the humanity beating in every heart.